Hello everyone, welcome again to Kinesiology 406 Exercise Physiology. This is our third, essentially, online class, and we're going into chapters 15 and 16, or finalizing chapters 15 and 16, body composition for sport and nutrition for sport. And that will be the crux of the exam, basically chapters 9 through 16 for our second exam, which will be due by the end of this week. More on that later, along with some study questions to help prepare you for that. And there'll be a couple more lectures that'll be kind of more toward next week's coursework coming up as well. I may actually have the next lecture be review based, high possibility of that actually help prepare you for that exam. Then the final lecture for this week would be then going for information that's actually preparing you for next week, as far as the discussion board post and for content for the coming weeks in our final few weeks of the class. That said, a few things to go over for our content from our last discussion points from last week regarding body composition and nutrition to some extent. Important questions for important concepts. One of the most important considerations in performing body fat, body composition testing, to be clear once again, some of you kind of mentioned it in your discussion board posts, but I want to be clear that whatever form of body fat testing you use to determine body fat, the most important thing is that when you retest, you can get consistent results. So if you test and you do it again right away, which you should, to make sure your numbers are accurate, regardless of whether you're doing bioimpedance, hydrostatic weighing may be a lot more complicated, certainly from a standpoint of the equipment, but for the typical ones you typically do, bioimpedance and bioelectrical impedance and caliper testing in particular, since those are very easy and very accessible for most of us, you certainly want to be doing that test 2 or 3 times in a row. You do a third if 2 tests in a row you do not have very similar results with no more than a millimeter off caliper testing and a very small percentage, like maybe from 7.8% to 8.2%, or if it was 15.1% to 15.3%. That's so minuscule that you can average and put 15.2, that's not a big deal. But if you have 15.1% and 16.5%, you got a 1.4%. That's a pretty substantial variation. You're going to need to retest a third time around to make sure you're accurate. Because the bottom line is, regardless of whether, if you do the test, you're the one that should do it again yourself, or however you do the test the first time is exactly as you do it the second time, and so on. So you have consistent results, because one person testing, doing calipers or bioelectrical impedance, a different machine, just like using a different machine in the gym, can give you different results. Be as consistent in the way you do it every time, so you can be sure that when you see changes, you can be sure those changes actually occurred, because that's what we're really looking for. We're looking for a baseline, then measuring change, not the exactness of the number itself. Hopefully that makes sense, okay? That said, is there an ideal body fat and weight for a given sport or activity? Hopefully you figured out by now that there is not. The reality is that for some endurance athletes, there are some females that can get as low as 5, 6, 7%, which is extremely low for a female for body fat for any sport, let alone for endurance, which you would tend to see typically lower body fat levels. But there have also been situations where someone with very high level body fat, and the book actually related it, that there was at the time, the world best time that one female had held for the 50-mile race, 80K, was actually, she was actually measured a few months before that at 37%. I kind of tend to argue that maybe there wasn't the most accurate of tests, because it's hard to believe that someone almost 40% body fat would be able to have a world best time for an ultra endurance event like that. But it just goes to show you there is a wide variation that's dependent more upon genetic factors, individual factors, training background, individuality, the way we tend to perform. That body fat by itself, in and of itself, is not of a primary concern other than measuring change, being clear about where you are in the beginning, and knowing how you're progressing. If your performance is waning and your body fat's going down, maybe you want to be paying attention to the fact that maybe you're getting too lean, possibly, right? We want to take a look at everything as a whole when we train for performance or train for fitness or anything we're training for, and not just looking at one variable independently, because it doesn't tell us enough. And that's just a simple fact for any variable, really, by itself, right? That said, how do you approach someone who you feel needs exercise, nutrition, or other similar advice, but who has not asked you for it? Well, it's always a tough one, isn't it? Do you really want to approach someone who doesn't tell you they want some information from you? Bottom line is, typically in those situations, you have to decide what's it really worth to be able to pull your athlete aside, to pull your personal training client aside, or whoever you're working with, and actually tell them realistically what's going on, or I should say, someone you have not worked with yet that you want to work with. Are you really blunt? If the person doesn't already trust you and hasn't already shown you that they feel completely trustworthy, or they feel you are completely trustworthy, in that what you say is they're certain to follow what you say, then you don't want to be too strong too early. You want to make sure you're honest, you're sincere, but you probably don't want to push the point. You want to wait until someone's asked. If they don't ask for help, if you offer the help, the probability is they're probably not going to take it. That said, I know there's always that fine line, there always will be, where if you're in a position of they're my athlete, or there's someone I'm working with, it's a little bit different as opposed to someone who is not actually currently working with you, in which case you probably want to wait till they come to you to bring the questions to you, or you ask them questions to self-reflect so they get more clarity for themselves about what they want to get from their training, or from their nutrition, or from their body fat percentage, however it might be. That said, if you suspect a disorder or disease, that's a different story from a standpoint of, certainly if they're your athlete, they're your student, they're someone you're working with, and if they're under 18, you need to make sure that you talk to their parents. And if they're over 18, you want to make sure they see a specialist, whether it's a psychologist or that's someone related to something with physiology, from a physical specialist in terms of medicine or therapy of any kind. You want to make sure they get the help they need. That being said, it's never easy. None of these situations ever are. There is no textbook response for how you respond to anyone who needs help. That said, if you don't create a safe environment whereby they feel comfortable, everything you say is highly likely to not go followed, right? Are there legitimate concerns about eating late at night? A much lighter level here. By itself, no, really not. Doesn't matter when you eat from a standpoint of general time. What matters is what is going on with your lifestyle, what are your independent needs, right? So as we kind of said before, if you're going to go to bed at 1 a.m. and it's 8 p.m., the idea you wouldn't eat past after 6 p.m. like some research articles will talk about, don't eat after a certain time. That makes absolutely no sense based upon your lifestyle. So that said, there's no specific concern by itself about eating late at night, except that you are eating for what you're going to be doing over the next 2-3 hours. You could argue maybe as much as 5 hours. So you want to take that into account with what you eat, right? If you're going to bed in 2 hours, probably not a good idea to eat a big meal, right? But if you're going to bed in 5 hours, probably a good idea to eat a big meal, all depending on what you have going on the next 5 hours. When are hormones maximized during the day? Your book actually relates that there's certain times of day when you have testosterone that's actually maximized around middle afternoon, around 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, and that's true from a standpoint of, more specifically, that testosterone and growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor in particular, so particularly strength and power type athletes, right? The ideal training from a general standpoint, this general is important to note here, is about 8 to 10 hours after you wake, okay? That being said, it isn't always possible to train 8 to 10 hours after you wake. If you get up at 6, well, then that would argue that theoretically you'd be training it between 2 and 4 p.m., right? And many times that is the case with a lot of high school sports, and not so much necessarily sports outside of high school and elementary type school. You see practices happen any time of day when it can be fit in to someone's schedule, and which comes to the point. If you normally wake up at a certain time and you train at a certain time consistently, your body will over time adapt hormonally, and you will see a higher level of testosterone, insulin-like growth factor, growth hormone, all the proper hormone responses coming at the time where you normally train. So whatever that is, that'll happen over time. It will probably take weeks, maybe even months, if it's an unusual time for you to be training. But just simply know that. Rather than worrying about the exact time for when your hormones are maximized during the day, you want to train according to a very similar time of day on a consistent basis, just like food. There's no exactness to when you eat. However, comes a point, we've all had this happen, especially like in grade school, elementary school, high school, that you get near lunch and every day your stomach grumbles, right? Or in the morning or dinner, before dinner, right before dinner, your stomach grumbles, because there are times in our lives when everything is very set, very consistent. When that happens, your body hormonally adjusts better. From a general standpoint, that's a good thing if we can reach such normalcy. It isn't always possible, but that is ideal. How much weight can realistically be lost or gained in a day? Now, we did say 10 to 30 pounds can be lost in a day, but from standpoint of realistically, well, you're probably looking at maybe a quarter of a pound or less than a quarter of a pound a day, something like that, being realistic in that it's not just water or gastrointestinal bulk. By the way, as you lose a lot of weight, if you're losing 50, 100 plus pounds, someone who's particularly higher than their ideal weight, whatever it might be, you might see a greater change, certainly. So it's natural and understandable to lose water and gastrointestinal bulk. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's also, because it is water and gastrointestinal bulk, not necessarily a good thing. It really depends upon the whole scope of what's going on, how long we're looking for, overall goals, but we still don't want it to happen too fast. The reality is you cannot lose or gain more than a pound, maximally 2 of muscle or fat in a given week. 2 pounds, by the way, to lose 2 pounds of fat, or even better, to gain 2 pounds of muscle is going to take the nth degree of genetic high potential, as well as perfect exercise training and pretty much perfect nutrition and sleep and life stress. Okay, because if that were really true, then you could actually gain basically 2 pounds times 52 pounds a week, times 52 weeks in a year, I should say, gain over 100 pounds of muscle this year. By the way, never happened in the history of the world. Can I be really clear here? No one's ever gained 100 pounds of muscle ever in a year. Okay, not pretty much more or less impossible. Never want to say impossible, but it's pretty darn close, because when you gain muscle, you also will gain water, and you'll gain intramuscular fat. So when you gain 100 pounds of muscle, you're probably going to gain around 300 or 400 pounds. Okay, you're going to get muscle is going to be at best a third or a quarter of what you gain at best, because as we said before, water is 45 to 65% of your weight. So as you gain 10 pounds, 4.5 to 6.5 pounds of that is water, right? And some fat, couple 2-3 pounds of fat. Now you're looking at maybe a couple pounds left for muscle out of every 10 pounds you gain. Okay. But from a standpoint of, if you could actually lose or gain 4 to 8 pounds in a given month on a consistent basis, you're doing something well, assuming that your actually energy level is high. That's key. Energy level must remain high. And I like to say, I want to know where you are in 16 weeks. I'm not so much concerned about what's happening in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, because drastic things can be done as far as weight loss, as far as crazy programs that someone can confuse the euphoria of how they feel happy with the actual physiological feelings of what's really going on. We can deceive ourselves, right? When you're in a good mood, sometimes you can ignoring the fact that you're actually sick or not feeling well, and that's not good. So we need to be in tune with that. It will take longer time, about a period of time, to really recognize the differences between psychological differences and physiological differences. Okay. Honey meals should be ingested daily. We kind of alluded to this a little bit. To be clear, it could be anywhere from between probably typically 3 on the basic side to as many as 7 or 8 or more in some unusual situations where someone's engaging in tremendously high levels of stress, high levels of exercise, typically like elite type athletes, or someone in an unusual circumstance where they're functioning from a military standpoint, or from a tremendously high stressful standpoint, like think of like the White House, how stressed those people are on a daily basis. I mean, any year of any time frame, you see that anybody who's working under high level stress around the clock, hardly any sleep, how often they eat really matters, and more frequently is probably a better idea. But now, to be clear, we'll talk more about carb, protein, and fat for how long it breaks down to give more idea about how often you should be eating as well. And then water, we know we're getting enough water if we're going to the bathroom every 2 hours, right? And whether it's clear or whether it's colorful is less concerning. You don't want it to be looking like it's brown or looking like essentially like apple juice. Okay, you want to look more like a lemonade than apple juice. Some bright colors is just simply antioxidants being peed out because you just got too many of those things. That's normal. That's all there is to it. It happens. That says it's not a bad thing. And clear is not necessarily good or bad. It just simply means you're not urinating anything else out. It's just straight water. So perhaps you're probably hydrated, but you could also be too hydrated. If you keep peeing on a regular basis, if you're going to the bathroom every half hour or every hour, which happens, that's too much stress. It's not good. Should calorie content be the primary eating plan determinant? This is an important question. The calorie is simply a measure, or a kilocalorie, of the amount of heat required or energy required to heat 1 kilogram of water 1 degree Celsius. It's a measure of heat, and by measuring heat, we can measure metabolic rate. We can measure, all sorts of different bodily responses by measuring heat. However, that is not the end-all be-all for what our body needs. Heat. It's more to it than that. That's why talking about calories can be overdone and often is. Nutrients is a better way to go. macronutrients, carb, protein, fat. Some people argue water is a macronutrient. Some people argue it's a micronutrient, depending on whether they're talking about the biological size of the nutrient or how much you take in. That being said, water we tend to often refer to as a macronutrient because how often you take it in, although it could be argued it's a micronutrient based upon its biological differences as far as size molecularly. That being said, even better than nutrients is food. One of the best books I ever saw on nutrition was by Michael Pollan, I believe his name was. I'm not getting that mistaken or being incorrect here. He wrote a book basically talking about food rules, and it was real simple. Eat food, not too much, mostly vegetables. 3 very good rules. You can argue that one could be a great one right there by itself, and for the average population, not a bad thing. But the more we have the importance of performance, the more we need to take a closer look at the nutrients we're taking in. And what should you increase if you need more energy? Carbohydrate, water and carbohydrate, right? Reduced irritability and anxiety, water and carbohydrate, okay? Biggest ones by far. Does that mean that protein and fat aren't playing a role? No, they could be, but more than likely it's carbohydrate. Everybody I've ever known that regularly is very irritable and anxious almost always has drastically low levels of carbohydrate, particularly complex, low glycemic index. They're lacking complex, low glycemic index carbohydrates, whole foods, okay? They're not eating enough of those things. That's almost always the case. And I get in such arguments with people about, oh, I don't eat that many carbs, that carbs aren't good for me, carbs are the reason people get fat, and they go on and on and on. And I make them eat. I said, just do it for me one time. Matter of fact, for a couple days. Give it a shot. And they go, oh, I feel so much better. Almost every single time. In my experience, every time. Okay? Are there exceptions out there? There always are, right? Mental focus. Carb, okay? Muscle gain, well, protein. Unquestionably, you want to have size gain. Well, calories as a whole, certainly eating a lot of everything. If you just want to get big. That said, you want muscle gain in particular, you got to have sufficient protein. No question about it. Weight loss. Typically, people aren't eating enough carbohydrate, and the weight loss goes really high early because of all the water and gastrointestinal bulk lost, but ultimately because they have no stored glycogen, they have no metabolic rate because they're not taking enough carbohydrate in, and so consequently they lower the metabolic rate. If you eat too little and don't exercise, you just lower your metabolic rate, and you make it you're more likely to gain all the weight back and more, with your body being much more intelligent than you and knowing better by storing more water around the next time around, so you gain weight faster than you ever did before by going a drastic caloric restrictive diet, let alone a drastic carb restrictive diet. Is there an ideal diet? No, there is not. There isn't. Now that we gave those numbers about 55 to 65% carbohydrate, 20 to 35% fat, 10 to 25% protein, 15% some people will say, but protein can go higher than that, but it's unusual situations, right? Generally speaking, those are pretty good numbers. Are they exact? No, but there are many people that go outside those areas for long periods and perform at high levels. So as far as nutrient quality and timing, what should you eat pre-training? Well, higher carbohydrate, because from the standpoint of we want to have enough stored glycogen to be able to provide enough sufficient energy for longer periods, especially if we're doing glycolytic or significant aerobic type training. If we're trying to gain muscle size, hypertrophy, all the above, which is glycolytic, right? To be clear, most hypertrophy benefit is going to come from glycolytic type training. That being said, certainly maximal strength and speed work will play a role as well, less so, but still to some extent true. Certainly right before you eat, regardless, high carb, moderate protein, and low fat for the pre-workout meal 1 to 2 hours before. Okay, as much as 3 for some people if they have gastric issues, or just change up the foods and what you eat. You got to play with this a little bit here. Keeping it low fat, really moderate to low protein. 20% is considered to be a fairly good protein amount, by the way, and mostly carbohydrate. Vitamins B and C are water soluble, and excess are going to be secreted. So if you actually feel that, what you're really getting is just the difference in just you're taking too much B and C, maybe carbohydrate getting high in those B and Cs. Don't worry about it. That's the case. But it's difficult to eat too much pre-training wise. That said, intake post-training, well, if training is high intensity, 75% or higher VO2 max or similar or greater output for 45, 60 minutes or more, well, then it's carb protein shake 30 to 90 minutes after. You probably don't want to take that carb protein shake within 30 minutes post-training because you actually could limit growth hormone. You could limit insulin-like growth factor. Consequently, muscle size is the goal. The goal is maximal strength, maximal size, maximal power. don't take your shake in sooner than 30 minutes post-training. Wait at least 30 minutes, somewhere in that 30 to 90 minute window. Some people make a big deal about some exact number, like 15 minutes or exactly 1 hour. And hey, if you feel good by doing it that way and you've got good results over a period of time, please go for it. That said, this is a pretty good general number here. And the ratio is 3 to 4. We mentioned this briefly before last lecture. 3 or 4 carb to every 1 gram, so to speak. 3 or 4 gram carb to 1 gram protein. That is the ratio that's been proven over and over again. And some might even tell you that chocolate milk is an exact ratio. And from a standpoint of the ratio, can't beat chocolate milk. From a cost standpoint, pretty good for chocolate milk. That said, that may not be your drink of choice, may have issues with milk, find something else, but that can work. Okay? Eat a whole meal regardless of what intensity you trained at. So this is just for the high intensity training. If you didn't train hard, no matter what you did, eat a real meal within either within 1 to 2 hours of training or 1 to 2 hours post that shake you took in. Okay. How long do nutrients taken in isolation require to break down to be utilized? This is a good question. Carb, less than 60 minutes. So if you eat glycemic index carbohydrates that are low in the glycemic index, closer to 0, you can't have 0, that'd be nothing. But away from 100, which is pure glucose, lower glycemic index carbohydrates, like some sweet potatoes, yams, quinoa, things like that, and some oats, things like that may actually have a really low 20 to 40 glycemic index rating, whereby it will burn over a much slower rate, so to speak, and can give you energy for a longer period. Rather than worrying about the insulin response by itself, we have to think about what energy we need. Matter of fact, if you know in 10 minutes you're going to have a meal, but you're dying right now, having a piece of fruit, or even worst case, like a energy bar, or even worse than that, candy, something like that. You need something with some kind of sugar or something just for the moment you're feeling like you're shaky, right? Take something in, as long as you know the more close to sugar, straight sugar it is, the faster it's going to go through you. So you probably want to be within a few minutes getting something to eat if you're eating something like sugar, straight sugar, right? That's something to take into account too. Protein takes 1 to 2 hours to break down. So when you eat protein with carb, you're looking at nutrients for about up to 2 hours, okay, with carbohydrate and protein, which is why you eat 1 to 2 hours before your workout with both protein and carbohydrate. Fat, basically 3 to 5 hours. So you could eat a pre-workout meal with a lot of fat in it, but you better be looking at 3 hours plus before you then plan on working out if you want that to be the case. That can work, but you're going to be needing to have a much longer period. The concern would be you'd be eating too little. You would have too much time between time you ate and training. You might not have optimal performance. That being said, you can give that a shot. Try it out in practice. Don't try it a big day when you really need to be on. Don't do something new on the day you need to be performing at a high level. Regardless, we're talking about like a test in real life, or a meeting, or a presentation, let alone exercise and training performance. How do I maintain high insulin sensitivity or proper excretion of insulin, essentially, from food? Well, eat more complex, low glycemic index carbohydrate foods. You won't have a significant insulin secretion if you have higher complex carbohydrate / low glycemic index foods. Also, eating protein or fat with carbohydrate, same meal, slows the absorption rate, slows the breakdown rate to 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. So that'll work as well, or can work as well. And of course, eat whole foods, real foods. You're not going to, when people talk about fruit, I've heard someone say you're going to get fat from eating fruit. If you haven't heard it, you're going to hear it. I still can't believe when I hear it. Excuse me. But fruit juice and fruit are not the same thing. Fruit in its natural state, yes, has at least some fruits are higher in the glycemic index scale. However, they also contain fiber, and fiber slows down the breakdown rate as well, consequently limiting insulin secretion or not having such a high insulin secretion. So less concern about inhibiting glucagon, less concern about storing fat. If you eat a bunch of fruit, real whole fruit, the probability of you getting fat from fruit is I can't imagine it's even happened. Matter of fact, what people often talk about vegetarian eating, I should say, too much carbohydrate, right, is a concern. Well, vegetarians, people I know who actually take care of themselves, eat the vegetarian way, the right way, and eat the more complex carbohydrates, get a lot of fiber, not too much sugar, right, eat whole foods. I'm never noticing a lot of them to be large people at all, and they're not highly. Now, they may be a little more on the body fat level if they don't exercise at all. No matter what you do, just because you eat lean is not going to mean you're going to be lean if you don't exercise because you got no metabolism. Okay. Ergogenic aids. Let's get into more specific things beyond the food we take in, the water we take in. Caffeine. Caffeine peaks between 15 to 60 minutes after ingestion, and you got to be well hydrated. You got to be drinking a lot of water if you're going to do this, and rested to avoid, chronic adrenal dysfunction. Caffeine basically blocks the adrenal receptors, leaving them open and potentially adrenaline depleted if you do this on a regular basis. And actually, it can aid endurance performance, mental focus, increased alertness. It's a CNS stimulant, right? It's going to stimulate the central nervous system, which can be a good thing. Increased fatty acid utilization and preservation of glucose, all good things. That said, it can still be too much for most people if they're taking 150, 200 milligrams on a regular basis. If you get the largest of coffees, the venti coffee from Starbucks, drink that every day, you're probably looking at 300 milligrams or more of caffeine. That's a lot of caffeine. That said, the recommendation is going off caffeine for at least 7 days to optimize the effect. 21-7 ratio is really recommended to be the most ideal. 21 days on, 7 days off. Okay. That being said, if you don't do caffeine at all, don't start. Creatine monohydrate peaks also between 15 to 60 minutes after ingestion. And you do have to, again, be well hydrated, this time to avoid side effects of stomach cramping and digestive issues. Certainly, if you drink enough water, I don't know anyone have trouble with creatine monohydrate from a standpoint of gastric issues or stomach issues or pain or cramping unless they didn't get enough water. You got to plan on drinking at least 1.5 times, maybe double the water, depends on the person, but plan on drinking a lot of water if you're doing creatine monohydrate on a regular basis. You don't necessarily need to load it, okay? It's really supposed to be 3 to 5 grams a day in most situations with most people and on a regular basis, as opposed to worrying about trying to load it in advance and putting a lot of stress on the system digestively. It's particularly effective for high-intensity glycolytic activity. Some have actually said it helps with creatine phosphate. Well, creatine phosphate gives you energy for the first few seconds. Creatine monohydrate is not the most effective for work that is performed in the several seconds. It's more like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, up to 60 seconds. So it's really 30 to 60 seconds work, our hypertrophy training, our glycolytic work, right? That's where this is really most helpful. If the goal is size, the goal is glycolytic interval type training type work, creatine monohydrate can help a great deal with that. And it also improves hydration in the muscles. That's why people seem to be bloated after they take the creatine monohydrate initially, and longer term is more toward hypertrophy. Other ergogenic aids. Beta-alanine or beta-alanine is a precursor for synthesis of carnosine, which aids the buffering of hydrogen ions. So taking beta-alanine in, particularly for when you're doing high-intensity type training, post-training can play, or pre-training actually, can play a big role with helping recover from high-intensity stress by buffering those hydrogen ions and actually helping them circulate them through and not feeling fatigue. You can train for longer, and you can actually train again sooner. Both good things. Okay? That can create a significant tingling or burning skin sensation and shakiness. And I've seen people take too much of it. I've actually taken just a touch too much. Luckily, never had any major reaction. But I know of some people who have taken way too much of this. It's again about 3 to 5 milligram range per day. Okay. And of course, you can increase your muscle buffering capacity by 3 to 5%, which is a pretty significant thing if you're talking about elite performance or even performance over a long period of time. That plays a monstrous difference. Up to 5%, that's big. Okay, it's again effective in glycolytic work. This time a little bit longer duration than you'd see from creatine monohydrate. So beta-alanine is a lot more for the more significantly, a little bit longer duration glycolytic work going into shorter duration type aerobic type work. 1 to 3 minutes with some performance improvements as high as 12 to 14%. That's pretty impressive right there. Sodium bicarbonate, or basically baking soda, okay, or the similar buffers, increases extracellular capacity to buffer hydrogen ions, and they interfere with hydrogen ion development. So it reduces their interference with the ability for ATP to bind for the ability to perform muscular contraction, because those excess hydrogen ions like to occupy binding sites, so it actually blocks or inhibits those myosin heads from actually contracting and pulling on the actin strands, which we don't want to the case, obviously, for performance. So sodium bicarbonate can dramatically reduce, increase time to fatigue, reduce fatigue, and so by doing that allows you to put in more volume of work, which can be tremendous for improving aerobic capacity or anaerobic glycolysis or glycolytic type performances. Okay, it can cause moderate to severe gastrointestinal distress. If you think about it, taking straight baking soda, that can certainly do that if you're not well hydrated. Okay, it can improve your glycolytic and high intensity interval training performance by as much as 2 to 8%. Pretty good numbers right there, about 60 seconds of work. Okay. That said, discussion board posting, we'll have your first post this week will be due by Thursday, 3/26. Okay, that's up now, and all postings, meaning everything after your first post, at least 2 of the people you respond to with high quality manner, hopefully more, including me, because this week, unlike last week, I gave you the leeway, gave you all the way till Sunday. No, your first post has to be in by Thursday, or you're going to be docked points, at least 10%, as much as 20% if it's not in on time. Your lab, remember, not trying to get our lab done on lab day anymore. Now we're going by the end of the week, trying to make it easier on you, make it easier on all of us, giving you the work to be done, essentially all work to be done by the end of the week, including exams. And your exam, basically, is going to be your second exam, will be due this week. And I'm going to give this to you shortly. It's going to be over chapters 9 to 16, okay, 9 through 16. I'm going to have, at the bare minimum, give you at least one more lecture that probably is going to be going over content for that exam, preparing you for it, getting you ready for that exam. And that said, that will be also due, even though it's going to be coming sometime, study guide information, prep information by Tuesday. The exam will be posted Tuesday or Wednesday. You got to get it done by Sunday. It'll be timed. It's going to be not long. It's not going to give you a full hour, probably. It's going to be less than that. Okay, you're going to be expected to know it and be able to do it quickly because you're going to be at home, trying to limit your capacity to try to be searching for answers while you're doing it. Okay, that said, let me know what you need. Thanks for coping with our challenges. I know things are difficult. Email me if you need to. Call me if you need to. Basically, my number. Actually, email me. I don't think my number is on there, but feel free to email me and we'll set up a time to make a phone call if we need to. Want to make this as easy for you as possible while still getting quality content in here, not overly challenging you with probably everything that's going on with you, but enough that you get the information. Okay? Take care of yourselves. We'll see you again soon.